Welcome to WinDevCon 2007 Ajax course. Ajax stands for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML, and during the course, coming course, we're going to talk about what is Ajax, how you can use it in order to have a better website. So now that we know what Ajax stands for, we're going to explain each of these words, and not necessarily in the order it stands for. First, JavaScript. Well, JavaScript because the client side of the Ajax system is managed in JavaScript, like basically everything else that can happen on a browser. The code that is running the browser side is JavaScript. That's the only code available on the client side. Now XML. XML is the format that the data is transported in. So clearly, when you do an Ajax communication, well, it has to be between the client and the server, and you're sending data from the client to the server and receiving data from the server to the client. And this data needs formatting. So the choice of formatting was XML. So by using XML, it standardized the way the data is transported. Now, why asynchronous? Well, that's a little more complex. Up to this point, JavaScript and XML, these are two very standard way of doing things. Now, asynchronous is the communication part. And the basic Ajax communication layer is asynchronous. What does that mean? Let's talk about a non-asynchronous first. Normally, non-asynchronous situation, the user is going to click on a button, a link, or anything like that. The browser is going to send a request to the server. Then the browser is going to wait for the answer, receive the answer, and display the answer. As you can see, all that is done one after the other, and the browser and the server are talking with each other in the synchronous way. Now in Ajax, the user clicks, the browser sends the request to the server in a slightly different way. Then the browser stores the ID of the request, some kind of identifying information for that request, and also store what code should process the answer. Basically, it's saying, okay, when the answer arrives, I don't know when it's going to be, but I don't care. When the answer arrives, the code in charge of processing the answer is that procedure. And then the browser goes on to do what he has to do. The user clicks on something else, this, that, the other, it doesn't matter. It's not waiting for anything at that point. Now at some point an answer is received. And when the answer is received, there's something like an event. Okay, some information arrived for you. What do you want to do? The browser checks the ID of this answer and calls the corresponding code, the code that was waiting for that information. It was not waiting for the code that was supposed to process the information more precisely. And then this corresponding code is going to manage the answer, extract information from the XML formatting, and is going to do the necessary display. As you can see, the way things are working are not synchronous. You have a question going out, nobody's waiting for the answer, and at some point the phone rings and you have a message, and the message is processed. That's the asynchronous communication that is used in Ajax. So, what happens when you are using an Ajax enabled control? Obviously, you're not coding all that. You're just checking Ajax enable, and that's all there is to it. So, all this has to be done behind the scene for you by the Ajax control. So, we are talking about a table, by example. You have a file table Ajax enable, and the user drags the scroll bar down. Classical situation. You don't code one line to do that. Everything is done by WebDev. So let's try to understand what's going on. There is, of course, for each control on the WebDev page, some JavaScript code. It's all this wonderful JavaScript procedure that are in your resource directory, and they are managing all this kind of thing for you. Of course, they have to download at the same time than your page, and that's why your page is bigger than what you think it is. It's the equivalent for your browser of the DLL that you have to send with your program. That's the part that goes on the customer side, on the client side, and has to be downloaded. So remember, each time you are asking for more feature on the browser side, you are asking for your website to slow down, because all that has to be downloaded. But that's not the point currently. You have a wonderful table with Ajax enable, and the code of the JavaScript, the corresponding JavaScript code, is going to do some things for you. First, it's going to read how far the scroll bar went. Then it's going to send a request to the server for the corresponding data line. It's going to tell the server, okay, send me now the lines starting at the line 600. Of course, it's going to store the ID of the request and store the name of the procedure in charge of the data display in the table. Again, it's a procedure that you don't know about. It's all in this JavaScript program. At some point later, the answer will arrive, and it's the new lines to display. So the browser itself is going to read the ID, call the corresponding code, and the code in question is going to extract the data from the XML formatted string, basically going to have one per column and all this kind of thing, display the line in the table. And remember that during this time, the user did continue to drag the scroll bar more. So again, this code is going to happen, and you will have another request with another ID, another answer, and this information coming back to display the remaining part. So all that is done behind the scene for you automatically when you click Ajax enable. Just to give you an idea of what's going on and why from time to time there's a little bug, something not working perfectly well. Yeah, they're doing quite a lot of things for you. Of course, the same thing is available by code. You can use Ajax in your browser code. Why would you want to do such a thing? Well, the first reason that you already know about is because you want to debug your code. And because of that, you're going to use my CLLog class and this wonderful system of calling the log class via global procedure in Ajax Execute asynchronous mode. So that's the first reason why you're going to use Ajax, I'm sure, in the following weeks. Now, there are many other reasons why you would want to use Ajax. One of the reasons is that in Ajax only the data is sent, not the whole page, which means that there is less information coming back and forth, which means that the transmission is faster, that the next page of your website is going to display earlier, and it won't flash because you don't have the whole page to reload with all the image and all that, just the content of the table in that example or anything else that you want to display. And also because, well, again, it's a way to put a smaller load on the server and therefore to accommodate more users on the same hardware. Obviously, if you have less information to send, the bandwidth request is less. The processing of that bandwidth is going to be less on the server too, because of course, yes, the server has to get to the data in the file. That's the same thing in both cases. But now it has to send that data to the browser, and only the data, not the whole page with all the graphical elements, with all these things. It doesn't have to send that back again. So it's more processing time available to accommodate more users. Another case where you would want to use Ajax is when you want to use some exotic controls. What do I call exotic controls? Well, it's when you want to manage things in a specific way, or you need a control that is not working in Ajax yet, at least, because remember, they are making progress all the time, and with each version that's coming out from PCSoft workshop, we have more and more things working in Ajax natively. So that's a need that you can have to do something specific that they just are not providing currently in native Ajax. So also another very good reason is that you just want to play with Ajax to see what it does. So that's all the reason that I could think of, and I'm sure that you'll find one that you like in all that. If you want to play with Ajax, of course you're going to need to know what is available in W language for that. So that's what we are going now to have a look at. In fact, in Ajax you have 5 functions. That's all you have in W language to manage all this wonderful stuff. The first one is Ajax available. This function is in charge of testing if Ajax is available on the user browser, because you have to remember that only the latest browser are supporting that technology. So basically Internet Explorer, Firefox 2, all these kind of things are supporting that. And by a very lucky strike, it's the browser that you're interested in. I don't think that you should care really if something is using Netscape 4 or Internet Explorer 3 or Firefox 1, except if you're really in a case that is a software specific for a very poorly tech supplied country, which can be the case, of course. But if you're not in that specific case, you can consider that everybody in our region of the planet is using a browser that can support Ajax. So yes, you should test if Ajax is available, but if it's not, don't worry about it. Remember one thing. The help file says that if Ajax is not available in a browser, then the website is going to work as if you would not use Ajax. Well, yes and no. By example, I put at some point a file table in Ajax mode on a page, and I tested it on a browser where Ajax was not available. Well, the file table loaded all the record of the file in it. And if you have a 300,000 record, it's going to take quite some time. Another very beautiful side effect of that is that, well, the page was about 3 kilometers long. It went from here to the center of the earth and perhaps even further away. So you don't want that to happen. Basically, at the beginning of your website, if you're using Ajax and Ajax is not available, just tell the user this website will not work without Ajax. Use Firefox, use Internet Explorer, but don't come back without it. The second function is Ajax Execute. We've talked mainly about Ajax Execute asynchronous, but Ajax Execute exists too, and in that case it's in synchronous mode, which means that it calls a server procedure from the browser code. Of course, the procedure needs to be authorized, which means that the procedure by default cannot be called by Ajax mode. Why? Well, obviously, if all the procedures that you have on the server could be called by any type of HTML code out there, it would be a huge security threat. Imagine that you have one procedure that deletes records, and you can call it from any browser. Suddenly, any hacker that finds out it's the case is going to call it and say, okay, delete this record, that record, this record, that record, and delete everything in your database. You don't want to do that. So obviously you don't want to have a dangerous procedure being called via Ajax, at least not without a huge security check. Okay, so any procedure that you want to call via Ajax has to be specifically authorized. How do you do that? You just go in your code editor, and on the procedure title line you will see this Ajax written label and a red dot on the side. You click on it, it becomes green, and you can call the procedure. If you forget to do that, well, you just have a compiler error saying that the procedure cannot be called. That's all. The difference with the call that we saw previously is that in Ajax Execute, a way of doing things, the code is going to wait for the answer coming from the server. So you don't have to tell the browser to store an ID and do all this kind of thing. You just wait for the answer, and when the answer arrives, you're going to be able to process it, because the result of that call is going to be directly the string or XML document. How does that work? Well, it's a string basically, or it's a file, and the file is managed directly on your browser. I don't know why they had to manage a file. It must be a standard that is out there. I couldn't think of a reason why you would want to receive a file and process it. Perhaps it's in the case where answer were pre-processed and you have a set and answer already done, so you don't have to process them, you just send the file like that. I don't know. It's the only hypothesis I was able to come up with. If you find something else, please tell me. But basically, most of the time I think that you're going to just receive a string, and this string is going to be XML formatted if you formatted it that way on the server. If you decide to just have a string with no XML in it and just one line after the other, and each line is the record, or to use my methods to store information in a specific way using the parameter class, you can do that. It's up to you. You will just have to manage it on the other side too. So the result is a string, and you do whatever you have to do with it at that point. Now we have the Ajax Execute asynchronous, which is the most common call, because, well, obviously if you want to use Ajax to its full extent, what you want to do is not wait for the answer. Let the user continue to play with the control, and when the answer arrives, you process it on the fly. That's the reason why they created that system in the first place. So with Ajax Execute asynchronous, this method is going to call a server procedure from the browser code again. Again, the procedure needs to be authorized for the exact same reason. And the main difference is that it will not wait for the answer. It will just continue the code of the browser without waiting for anything. It's like the difference between an info and a trace. This one is just going to continue one after the other. So the server side is going to send the answer at some point, and the result is again going to be a string or an XML document. But it's not the Ajax Execute asynchronous result. It's just the result is going to be sent by the server. So you have to manage that some way. So the result of the server procedure is going to go to another browser code, another browser procedure that is defined in the call. So when you are doing an Ajax Execute asynchronous, you are saying, okay, I want to call that procedure, and when the answer arrives, I want it to go to this procedure local browser procedure. When you do an Ajax Execute asynchronous, again, you have a result for your call, and the result is just an ID. It's the ID of this call in order to be able to identify it later. So why would you want to identify this call to the server? Well, because you have to manage them one way or another if you are sending multiple calls one after the other. The example of that we have is the table. Obviously, if the user is dragging down continuously the scroll bar of the table, there is no point in displaying the result of the first call when the user already asked for, in fact, the line that are 200 lines later. You're just going to waste time. So when you the user continue to drag the scroll bar down, you want to know, is there another call already for that? So Ajax asynchronous call pending is doing exactly that. It tests if a specific asynchronous call is not finished yet, and for that it uses the ID returned by the call. So what would you do in that case? Well, you would first do an Ajax Execute asynchronous, then store the ID returned by that call, and when you come back in the same code during this specific call to the server to have the next line, you would test is the previous ID call finished or not. And if it's not finished, then you would use the fifth function, which is Ajax cancel asynchronous call, and you would just cancel that code, the previous one, saying, okay, I will not process the result of that call. I don't care about it anymore because I'm doing another call, and the other call is the information I want to process. This way, you're not going to lose time processing data coming in that is not the one that you need anymore because the user just did something else during that time, and it's going to be much more fluid. And again, of course, it's using the ID returned by the Ajax Execute asynchronous call. And that's all. With this 5 function, you have everything you need to manage the Ajax system. So what do you have? You can test if it's available or not. You can call a procedure from the server, from the browser side to the server, either asynchronously, which is the most current case, or synchronously. You can check if there's already a call waiting for the processing, and you can cancel a previous call in order not to have to process several calls one after the other when they arrive. It's now time to get away from the theory and do a little practical work. So we're going first to look at an example, the logic of an example that we can build. And we have a small requirement list. We're going to display in one control the companies and the contacts that are linked to that company for each company. We want to display 10 companies each time with a variable number of contacts from each company. We don't know how many contacts there are. And we want to go to the next 10 by just a click on a button. Quite simple, but you have no built-in control that is going to give you that. So, of course, we're going to want to use Ajax for split, display, and small load, or all this wonderful reason. And because we're in that mood, we're going also to want to use AWP for even having a smaller load, no session on the server. So, let's see first how it works. Yes, I coded that for you. So, we're going to first seeIt function. Remember that button in the WDebug example? CNC stands for company and contact. Display company and contact together using programmatic Ajax. Hop, here we are. As you can see, we have this wonderful loading that appears while the information is coming in. And in one table, we want to display the company and their link contact. Again, here we are on an AWP page, and the only thing that we have as parameter is a session 27. That's all we have. Then we're going to do the display of the next 10. Remember, here we are for 1 to 10, next 10 from 11, and as you can see, I'm clicking several times on it, and we are now at 151. Going back to the previous page, and again coming here to the same one, and we are still on the 151 because the system, the way it's built, is keeping in the session 27 information that we were previously displaying from 151. So when I'm going back and forth between these two pages, I'm continuing my session and I'm still in 151, and if I do next, I'm on 161. Okay, that's how it's working. Now let's see how it's done behind the scene in the code. I'm sure that you're very curious about that. Well, let's close this, go WebDev 11, and have a look first here at this button. So again, the exact same thing that we are doing in the previous session managed button. We are creating a session if necessary, so that's I don't have to go back in that code. And then we are just doing a page display of the page company contact and sending it the session ID. So we're going to have a look at the page company contact, in which basically everything we're interested in is standing. So what are we doing in the page itself? First thing, here we are receiving the session ID, storing in a variable that is global to the page, and just creating two variables with the last displayed company and the last asynchronous ID. And this, as you can see, is first set to 0. Then in the onload of the page in the browser, we are doing an execute process, in English. Let's do that immediately. Code language, translate into English. Sorry about that. So execute process of button next. Click. Well, that is just in order to have all the display code in one place, the button, and we're just doing that. So, well, we can look at the button next code. And in this code, there's nothing on the server again, and on the browser side, we are just going to display the next 10 information. So we have the last display company ID in this variable. First, we check if there is already a call in process. That's the case where the user is clicking several times on the button without letting the time to the system to get the information from the server. And if we do, then we are just canceling the previous process, because obviously we don't want to have to display all the intermediate value when we just have to decide the last ones. And here we are just doing this Ajax Execute asynchronous of the get next 10 company. It's obviously something that has to be done on the server. And sorry about that again, can't see anything. Display the next 10 companies is the name of the local browser procedure that is in charge of doing the display when the information is coming from the server. And of course we are going to send the last displayed company in order to start from that point. and of course also the session ID, because we want to store that information in the session for the next call. Once this is done, we're just going to put in the last display company, the current one plus 10, and that's of course a temporary thing, because we don't know how many company will come back. It's a maximum of 10, but it's not always 10, and also nothing says that you have company number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 with no holes in it. So currently we're just putting 10 in it, and when we'll process that in the actual display, we will deal with that accordingly. Let's have a look at the get next 10 companies on the server side. I'm going to just display this. As you can see, that's all there is, not a big thing. What are we doing? We are first storing the last display company, the session information, and we are using the session class to read in the session information what was the last displayed company stored in the file. If the value from the previous call is bigger than the last display company, then we are using that. That's just in order not to go back in time if we are calling things in the wrong order. Then we store the last display company for a display in the same session. That's absolutely simple. Session param right, session ID, and again this value Ajax last displayed company with the value in it. And then we're doing age filter, age with first, and of course inside that we are going to do the reading of the contact. This will of course create the infamous jigsaw problem, because we are at that point doing a second filter on the contact for each company. Once this is done, we are storing the result in a string, and as you can see it's not in XML format, and sending back the result. Well, let's go back to the previous code. So in the Ajax Execute Synchronous, I was calling the get next 10 company and just storing the last display company. So when this call is finished, it's going to send the result back, and the result is going to be processed by the browser code display next 10 company. So let's look at that one. That one is receiving the result of the call and the ID of the call. The result of the call is a string that I put in an S incoming string, and I'm looping to extract each line, and then depending of the content of the line, if the first information is 1 or 2, it's a company or a contact, and I just display it in a different way in it. And that's all. If you look at the code itself in the contact company page, that is here, let's close that. That's the next 10, and it's all it does. So when doing this kind of thing, obviously it's in fact very simple. So what happened when I go back? When I go back, I just again do page display with the session ID, and when once again I come back here, well, in the next 10 I'm going to work with the last display company, and if I'm coming from another page, it's currently at 0, and that's why in the code on the server side I'm doing this little bit of coding where I look what was done previously for that session. If previously for that session we already had a value, then I'm using that one, it's bigger, and I'm starting at the same point. It's just the way I decided to code that system. Of course, you could start back at the beginning. It's up to you. But it's just to give you an example of what you can do if you want to manage information between pages in a session. And basically, that's all there is to it. At that point, you have an example that combines Ajax code in the browser, object code on the server, AWP session with CL session and CL param, and the whole session management system. And it's not that complex. We are at the end of the WebDev courses, and we are able now to combine very easily all these concepts that you were probably a little afraid of before. And well, there's not that big of a deal. If you take it step by step, if you follow this example, you will see that you will be able to manage all these concepts and all these things without many problems. It's just another way of thinking about coding once again, and I hope that these courses will help you start on a good way.